Patrick. Welcome to the Startup Playbook Hustle, and thanks so much for taking the time out of your sleep-deprived schedule to be on the show.
You're very welcome.
So for those people that may not be as familiar with you or your background, do you want to share a little bit about your story and what got you here today?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm one of the co-founders of Cardly, and basically what we're about is trying to let people have meaningful communication in the hustle and bustle lives that we now have. And that idea sort of sprung from really my experience as a young kid and then growing up in a family business. My parents had news agencies, and that got me, made me aware of the greeting card industry. And, you know, it was actually our most profitable category. It was a really important category. We ended up building the business into something fairly sizable, with 50 stores around Australia, turning over $150 million. So it wasn't just one store. It turned out to be a bit of a minor empire. And through that experience, sort of got to understand the greeting card industry. I subsequently left the family business. It was time to sort of do my own thing, and came to Melbourne and got a lot more involved in e-commerce. I had a passion for e-commerce, even back in the family business, did some pottering around in that. Worked in some fairly large e-commerce businesses, then got poached from there to go and work at Samsung, and started working more in sort of digital disruptive space with things like ebooks and music streaming and stuff like that. And then I went and started my own digital agency, something which was interesting but also kind of a little bit frustrating. So I wanted to go back and do my own thing, and I started looking back at things that I could draw on and the experiences I had. And with especially ebooks and music streaming, I kind of landed on this idea that we're moving into a world where if something starts in a digital format, it kind of is infinitely scalable, and that's great. You kind of want, if whatever you're going to do is going to be really scalable. But the other thing that I was really aware of from my books experience was that if you have a product that can be commoditized, that it just becomes a race to zero. So, you know, books, I used to run the Borders Angus and Robertson e-commerce websites, and our biggest competitor was Amazon. And Amazon, they were prepared to not make money for over a decade. So they were always selling basically for less than we could even buy a book. So, I saw that books had been massively commoditized, and the way to avoid that is to come up with something more bespoke and personalized. So I thought, okay, well, how do I mix both personalization and digital together? And I started thinking about greeting cards, which I hadn't really been around for sort of 5-6 years. And I landed on this idea, well, wouldn't it be great if you could, access amazing independent greeting card artwork, and then really make it your own with what you do on the inside, which is kind of what you do in the real world, but do that all in the digital world. So we landed on this idea of doing handwriting and building a humanization engine to facilitate that, and then let people go even further by adding doodles and stuff. And the end result is that people can kind of do what they would do with a physical card in the digital world. We don't have to sit on any stock or anything like that. It stays as a digital product until we print and post it. So in that sense, it's kind of got all that beauty of scalability to it, at the same time as actually being a really nice product. So it's something that helps people connect. I'd kind of done a lot in the past where it was just sort of selling stuff to people that they didn't necessarily need. The beauty of what we're doing now is actually we're selling connection. We're letting people foster relationships or build on relationships and celebrate relationships. And that's really powerful. That's kind of where we are today. We've been at it for a little while, and things are going well.
Obviously, I want to come back and touch on Cardly, especially since I've known you for a little while as part of that journey. But I guess just going back, I'm always fascinated to figure out people's story and where everything kind of started. Yep. And so for me growing up, startups or entrepreneurship weren't really part of the vernacular and wasn't something that I considered at all. But my mum was, what you would describe as being super entrepreneurial. So at the moment she's got a cafe and a restaurant, but as far as I can remember, she was always creating things and trying to sell them at markets and those types of things. What was what was that kind of experience like in terms of seeing your parents build up those businesses? And I guess what was was that something that you knew that you wanted to do eventually, or was that just something that, anything that you kind of took away from that experience?
Yeah, I mean, when it's something that your parents did from your earliest childhood memory, was like my dad not necessarily being around the house that much because he was busy working and building something that we could all take advantage of as a family. So, that idea of hard work and striving for success and stuff has always been there. And, Dad's had great success in doing that, and he's still doing stuff now, even though he's sold out of the business and lives in Europe and does all sorts of really interesting things now. But, it's kind of, that's been the way our family is. It's work hard and try and build things and hopefully build something you can be proud of. And I think I picked that up. Like, mum and dad will tell me that, when I was like 5 or 6, I was trying to polish rocks and sell them to the other kids on the street and stuff like that. So, it was clearly something I'd picked up and decided I liked, even before I even realised that I was doing these things. It allowed me to sort of give up a lot when I was helping Dad grow the business, because I did enjoy it. Building something and seeing it grow and seeing it succeed was, it's addictive. Was it
a difficult decision then to leave the family business?
No, because it got to a point where, I'd learnt from my own experience certain things, and Dad was pretty set in his ways as well. So, we would have some pretty decent and feisty conversations about certain, differences of opinion, and, that wasn't healthy. So, I mean, we were always very good at separating work and family. So we could just have a stand-up blue at work and say, I don't agree, and storm out and go in our separate corners. But by the time the day was over, we'd, probably catch up at dinner and everything be normal. We wouldn't bother talking about it. That's something that, again, is been a really valuable thing to learn. It's not something that a lot of people bring to business. Some people bring a lot of personal stuff to business, and I think you do need to try and find that way of separating out. I may have a difference of opinion about something with you in regards to a business call, but that isn't about me having a difference of opinion about you as a person. That one's separate. For me, lots of learnings really early on, I think, have been really useful. And that, I'm sure others that have been in family businesses could relate to that as well.
So I guess when you left your family business, did you know that at that point you eventually wanted to start your own thing? Or you mentioned that you had also demonstrated that, like, an interest in the e-commerce space, and you dabbled in a few things.
Yep.
Again, really curious to understand, like, where did that sort of initial interest come from?
Yeah.
And did you know that was going to lead on to something?
I think I always did know that I wanted to be in that space, and I got some fantastic opportunities really early on, which, whilst it didn't, it still isn't around today, but back when I did get to go and work with Borders, it was a really successful brand, and people knew it, and it had amazing brand presence. So that was a real, pretty amazing opportunity to get. And I suppose even from an early, back in the family business, I was always looking at, we were in news agencies. It was clear from pretty early on that we were going to be disrupted by technology. So I started working in the business full time in, I think, 1996. So the internet was around. It only just got around, but it was around, and it was starting to, you could kind of start to see where it was going. So whilst the newspaper companies and the publishing industry generally weren't ready for the disruption, we were starting to think about how it could affect us. So we made the conscious decision, and this sort of loops back nicely to Cardly, to target a category like greeting cards, which we felt would be less susceptible to that sort of change. Once you start looking at what's going to come up and what's going to change things, your mindset shifts and you start to also see the opportunities in that. And that's where I started to think, well, hang on, there's during the tech bubble and all that sort of stuff, there were these businesses that were just coming out with a fairly spurious idea and all of a sudden being worth heaps of money. And of course, that was interesting to someone with a bit of an entrepreneurial bent. So I started to think how we could do that with our business. And there probably wasn't any really obvious things, but the one that I grabbed onto and was my first sort of foray into e-commerce was we built a back-to-school website. So we let people come onto the site and review a school list that we'd set up for the school. So the parent would just choose their grade and then go through the school list and just pick and choose the things on that school list they actually needed. So rather than having to just start with a catalogue and find everything, it was all there in one go. And that was actually something that Dad didn't see the potential of. I saw the potential of it, and it was something that became a bit of a point of frustration. Like we did, our first little foray into it, we did like $250,000 worth of sales in 5 weeks, and I was like, I think that's actually pretty good. And he's like, yeah, no, it was more pain than it was worth. So, slight difference of opinion, but super important learnings. Like it was a disaster in terms of fulfillment. Which was the first valuable lesson I learned in e-commerce, which is you live and die on your fulfillment. You can get people to come and buy stuff, but it's actually how do you then execute on that and not waste all your profit trying to actually get the stuff to people. It's and all of those things have kind of helped get me where I am now.
I just kind of want to pick on something that you mentioned there in terms of disagreements or like different points of views. So I was just having a conversation with a friend of mine from uni around how when I was at university, I literally had an intervention with friends of mine.
Wow.
Who were essentially going, what are you doing? You should be spending your time studying instead of trying to start random things or whatever.
Yep.
When I decided to quit my job, like similar sort of thing happened. I was just speaking to my mum yesterday and she's like, you remember when I was like kept telling you to get a part-time job or something just to kind of help pay the bills? From your own experience, how have you dealt with different points of view or different sort of experiences, or I guess just negative feedback for Cardly? Because it's such a, I personally, like we've jammed on this previously about how it's amazing that you're taking something that's innately personal and unscalable and creating a scalable methodology behind that. But I can see why that would be very challenging for a couple of people to grasp. Yeah,
it's there's actually not as much resistance to the idea as you'd think. So we've had a little bit of a profile out there, thanks to Shark Tank, and really we only ever got one negative comment. They kind of told us, hey, get ready, people will slam your idea, they'll think it's terrible. And there was only one comment. It was kind of like exactly that. Someone said, well, you've taken something that was personal and kind of made it impersonal. And I think it is actually fairly easy to refute that view of it, because whilst, yes, we digitize the experience, the words that you put into a card are still your own, and how you decide to express yourself is still your own. And like you would if you went to the store and bought a card, you're choosing a design that speaks to your aesthetic or whatever emotion you want to try and get across to someone. So, that we haven't actually got that much criticism from that perspective. But I think we do need to be careful, particularly as we branch into B2B, to not make the technology so ubiquitous or so that marketers abuse it and it loses its personal touch. So that's something that we're conscious of. But to your point, just generally about criticism and critique and different differences of opinion, I always love that adage of we've got two ears and one mouth and use them in that ratio. So I always pride myself on listening. People are going to have differences of opinion. But listen to them and don't just discount it because it doesn't align with what you think. 100%. Listen to why they think that is. And whilst they might have a terrible argument, in their mind it isn't. So don't, just stomp on their ideas. Listen to it and try and, express the counterpoint. If you've got a counterpoint, put some logic behind it and let them, hopefully listen back and see where we get to. I'm not one that, I don't think I end up in too many arguments with people. there's one that does stand out, and we can talk about that if you want to get to it. But for the most part, I think people, if they are listening, it's like marriage, it's like any relationship. If you're listening, you're halfway towards not having a conflict.
I think something that you mentioned there that was really interesting was the listening to feedback. It's been brought up so many times in the podcast from investors and successful founders is, everyone's got an opinion, everyone's got feedback, and it's important, as you mentioned, to listen to everything. But I think the best founders can disseminate that information and go, this is useful, and this isn't useful.
The distillation process is a difficult one. Everyone's got their 2 cents, and I think as with anything, there's always a little gem in everyone's opinion, and there may be something you haven't considered. So I think it's always valid, but you could get yourself into a point of decision paralysis because you just had too many conflicting opinions. So you do need to also have your own gut instinct and your own ideas, and sometimes back those. I've had situations where an advisor or someone, we sat down and sort of asked their opinion, and they've given it, and it mightn't have been what we wanted to hear. I haven't just rolled over and said, well, I think you're 100% right and I'll just give up. And I don't think any entrepreneur would. You'd always say, well, yep, valid, but this is how I think that particular point is not true or not valid. So, and look, often, in with our business, men do not buy greeting cards as a rule. They do, but not in the sort of same numbers as women. So when someone gives me a really strong opinion about their view of it, and maybe what to do with our consumer play or what have you, I will ask the question back, well, do you buy greeting cards? Do you understand the industry? And they may not. They may, but they may not. So I think that is a challenge, particularly when they're people that you totally respect and they've been there, done that. But I've had it explained to me as well that whilst someone has been successful, their success has got an expiry date, and that it's constantly becoming slightly more out of date as time goes by. And I think that's also valid. So, and no one's going to come to you with like all the right ideas for your business, because every business is different too. Absolutely.
So, I think we first met at Startup Victoria's pitch night.
Yep.
So I think you came along to the screening session. We picked you, and you came and pitched Cardly.
Yeah, did a rubbish job, and you gave us some pretty good feedback about why it was rubbish. Yeah.
Well, you ended up winning the night, didn't you?
Yeah, which was surprising, but it was good.
Yeah. Well, I mean, from my perspective as well, what I love about this podcast is just kind of bringing back people that I've known for a while.
Yep.
Just kind of getting to talk a little bit about the story and kind of the changes. And so, obviously, great pitch and things like that, but the business has evolved so much since that. I think it's been about 2 years or so, 2.5 years maybe.
I don't think it's quite that long, but it'll be almost 2 years in the middle of this year, I think.
Yeah. So I guess one of the big things that's kind of, when you look at Cardly, that's changed from that initial pitch is that I think you initially had a B2C model.
Well, we were totally focused on B2C.
But now you've pivoted to having a combination of that as well as having a B2B model. Can you talk a little bit through, I guess, the process of that transition and what sort of insights kind of led you to want to make that change?
Yeah. I might even go further back. So why did I land on B2C, or why did we, so Tom and myself, land on B2C as a starting point? It was because that's what I knew, right? So we tend to gravitate to what we know, and I'd known how people purchase greeting cards in the real world. So that's what I knew, and that was sort of my knowledge base. And I'd been in the consumer land in terms of e-commerce experience as well. So I hadn't built a B2B business prior. If I had, maybe I would have thought differently. And certainly now with 2020 hindsight, we totally should have. But yeah, so we somewhat naively thought that the idea would be so great that it would just, build its own momentum and gravity. And it did to an extent, but never to the extent that it needs to. So we knew that to take it to the next level from a consumer play, we'd have to throw a lot of money at it. And surprise, surprise, investors aren't so keen on just throwing lots of money at a marketing problem. So, yeah, we started to get approached by businesses pretty early on, actually. At least a couple of years ago, businesses started to say, hey, could we use this? And, you know, it was like a bit of a penny drop moment. And we'd had that advice as well from some of the early people that we'd sat down and spoken to. They said, look, consumer is just so hard. And we were learning that consumer was going to be really hard. And, you know, they reiterated what we quickly discovered, which was we could have 1,000 conversations with 1,000 customers and get them to buy 1 or 2 cards. Or we could have 10 conversations with businesses and get them to buy 1,000 cards. And that's totally proven to be correct. In terms of it being a huge pivot, fortunately, a lot of what we built, we could kind of repurpose. So the basic principles and ideas are much the same, but the approach is different. And we've built new tools to help businesses do what they need to do with the technology. And, you know, we're still pretty early on in that journey. So businesses can come to our site now and basically use a version of the site and send cards out. But, you know, they've already come to us and said, well, what if we just wanted to use your handwriting and humanization technology in other applications? And we kind of always had that on our roadmap, but it's actually something that they've pushed the conversation sort of to change the roadmap up a little bit. And now building out those APIs that take the technology away from our platform and actually let them integrate it into their stack is now the focus. So, and that's really exciting because that's not talking about 1,000 cards. That's talking about them just integrating it into a process where it's like 1,000 a day. Now, admittedly, the business model will be different. We're not going to be printing them. They'll be doing their own printing. But yeah, that's the scale of that is much more interesting to us and our investors, because it's going to be the easier play. We won't give up on B2C. I was literally catching up with one of our investors last night, and we're always torn, right? It's like, why do we keep having this consumer play if we can see all of this potential in business, in B2B play? And the thing is, it's working, so don't kill it. And eventually, there's this sort of nice cross-pollination between the improvements that we're bringing on for businesses actually have applications for consumers as well. So it will kind of just, I wouldn't say be the poor relation, but it'll just be on the back burner a little bit, but it will get some advantage from what we're doing with our B2B work. And we expect that over time, consumer will just keep finding more and more customers and keep building its own gravity and scale and get there. So,
you know, whenever we have, whenever we launch a startup or in the middle of building a business, we have a particular vision of what that sort of looks like.
Yep.
As well. You know, obviously, as you mentioned, we generally gravitate towards what we know.
Yep.
And for you, that was B2C e-commerce. So you mentioned that, you know, you had several conversations and things like that. Was that a, how long did that process take in terms of the feedback that you were getting to actually making that decision? And was there anything in particular that made that penny drop for you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I'm a Gemini, and I don't know if people say that means you're a twin or something. And whilst we are totally and utterly committed to B2B, I know it's going to work. I still haven't given up on B2C because that is still the first vision that I had, and I can still see it working too. So we do kind of keep our finger in both pies still. But in terms of the decision-making process, it was driven both by that advice, and the candid feedback is like, you're going to really struggle to get people excited about this idea from an investment point of view, because we knew we'd need some, with it just being a consumer play. You know, that's really hard to do, and you're going to need way too much money to even get to a point where you can say this thing's building enough traction to double down on investment. So that was some pretty frank feedback, and that certainly gave us pause. And then I think the penny drop moment was that, coupled with businesses saying, we want to actually use your product. So it became the path of least resistance. It was like, well, they want to do it. We're being told to do it. We should probably just do it. And then, from there, it's, seeing more businesses use it, seeing customers come back and buy more credits and continue to use it so they're obviously enjoying it. That's the best advocation or best sign of, that it's working. As far as I'm concerned, that you've got those repeat customers and retaining customers. That's given us greater confidence that it's totally the right path to be on.
I think in my chat with Morgan Ranieri from Your Grocer, we kind of spoke about something similar, and he was talking about more kind of the longer term play and strategy with that. And I think it was, as a founder, you're grappling with so many different things that often it's a matter of prioritization of different things as well. So what is actually the core of what our business stands for? And so the core for him wasn't necessarily that we will solve all of these problems.
Mm-hmm.
They wanted to make it easy for independent grocers to reach end consumers.
Yep.
And what that process looked like didn't matter as much, as long as they were reaching that kind of end goal. And I guess that's probably similar for you in terms of making that decision. It wasn't necessarily we want to do it in this particular way. We just want to make this a thing that people can access.
Yeah, I think we kind of intuitively felt that we live in a world where people crave connection, and we have more connection than ever, arguably, with the likes of Facebook and everything else, that we can message each other instantaneously. But how genuine is that? And that's where we kind of feel that there's a sweet spot, in that people want to show and express connection, but they don't want it to be trivial, and they don't want it to be easily dismissed. They want it to be real and substantive. And there's nothing better, in my opinion, and that's obviously up for debate, than actually receiving something tangible when someone wants to express a sentiment. And it's a rare thing now, right? We don't get that much mail. We don't get that much stuff, physical stuff where someone's actually expressing, people don't write letters anymore. And, for a while they are sort of sending less greeting cards as well. But, what we're doing is sort of giving people all of the ease of doing the sort of the Facebook, message, writing on someone's wall on their birthday. But it's so much more than that, because it's so much more genuine. People actually end up with something tangible. That's something they'll they keep, they put on their fridge. And it's, that message has a different kind of cut through and a different sentiment with it than you get from just a, hey, happy birthday, along with the other 56, 60, 70, 100 happy birthday message you got on your wall. So that's kind of, that was the vision, to help people be able to do that. And at the same time, it was also from my own learnings of, excuse me, how the greeting card industry works. It's actually a really crappy industry. So from an environmental point of view, it's really bad. For example, in Australia, the vast majority of greeting cards are that you'll see in a big box retailer like a Coles or a Woolworths, created and printed in China. They're then shipped across to Australia. They then get trucked into those stores and then get put onto the shelves. A third or more of which don't ever sell. They then get pulled out. They go and get pulped. So there's all the transport coming in and out. So there's quite a lot of wastage, and excessive amounts of a pretty significant carbon footprint against them. And beyond that, for mine, what makes a greeting card special, apart from what you put in it and the sentiment that you add to it, is the artist. So we, from day one, we sort of said we want to make it, the world a bit better for artists as well. So independent artists are an important part of what we're about. So we want to let independent artists get their artwork out, make their artwork ubiquitous. For the most part, our artists sell in like independent markets or maybe on Etsy. Some of them don't even have the nous to even do that. So we're helping them get their product out there. And we've we try and reward them as much as possible, so that unlike in the traditional model where an artist just creates something and gets paid $100, and then that card gets printed tens of thousands of times. Every time one of our artists has one of their cards printed, they get paid. So if they create something amazing that people absolutely love, they're rewarded for that, and I think that's important too. So yeah, we it was also about trying to disrupt a pretty staid and traditional industry, because it needs, in my opinion, a bit of disruption. So
so I just want to take a slight tangent with this. You recently went on to raise a seed round.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yep.
From quite a few different sources of funding. I just wanted to, obviously I'm sure there's a couple of listeners at the moment that are going through their fundraising or thinking about that process.
Yep.
What are some sort of suggestions, recommendations, starting points for someone who is about to go through that process at the moment?
Well, one, get yourself ready for a bit of a journey. It's not going to just happen straight away. You might have moments where you just really get lots of traction quickly, which we did at points, but then getting the entire round together was quite painful. But for mine, the biggest thing is, and I was having this conversation with one of our investors just last night, is start having conversations, and don't have a conversation where you just put your hand out. That's never going to work. Our first investor came on, I think 12 months after we'd first spoken to them. So we attended a Startup Victoria event and went and spoke to them at the end of their presentation. We're really impressed with what he had to say, and just sort of said, well, look, this is what we're doing, and we'd love sort of your feedback on what we're about. And and that's, I think, probably the most important thing is just ask for feedback. Don't ask for money. And when I picked up the conversation with him 6 to 12 months later, we'd finally decided, well, we're gonna raise, so we better put together a pitch deck. And we'd had a bit of correspondence with him after that night, and had got some feedback, and decided, well, you're part of our Brains Trust now. We'll ask you for some more feedback. So I sent him across our deck, and he rang me straight away and gave me some really candid advice on what he thought was good about it and what he thought was bad about it. And he said, and I'm in. I'm like, oh, I wasn't asking you to be in or out, but that's awesome. And so, I think that's kind of a very similar journey that I've heard a lot of people have had. It's about building a bit of a network of people and getting their advice before you have a conversation about money, and listening to that advice. The worst thing you can do is go back to someone that has given you some what they thought were pearls of wisdom, and you've just discounted them completely and come back and said, well, I didn't do any of those things that you said, and by the way, can I have some money? That's never going to work. So that for mine is the big one, and it kind of goes to that earlier comment, right? So it's about listening. Be a sponge. These people have gone and done these things before. They're very generous with their time. I've found that I've been able to talk with the biggest funds in Australia without any difficulty. You've got to have the balls to go and do it, sure. But apart from that, they're open to having conversations. So I think we've got a great ecosystem in terms of that. But go with the mindset of listening and not pitching. Pitching comes later. You'll probably be pitching in the conversation without it being a pitch. You're telling them about your idea, so naturally you are pitching the idea, but you're not pitching to try and get an outcome. You're just trying to get some feedback on your idea.
I think one thing that often gets overlooked from the investor relationship is the need for them to see the lines, not dots, in particular things. So getting a certain amount of revenue is meaningless without the context of where you've come from and the lessons that you've got.
Yep.
And also them getting to know you and understand you helps de-risk their own opportunity of, is this the right person?
Totally. I mean, particularly with the seed round, they're still not probably investing in your financials, they're investing in you. So they need to know who you are, what experience do you bring to the table, and to something that we've spoken about previously. It's why are you uniquely qualified to be the person to build this company and to make it successful, and that's I think that's where we've had success with our investors, because they've gone, yeah, actually you do have experience in the areas that you're trying to tackle, and Tom's an amazing tech dev, and can has built some great technology without funding. So they're kind of like, hey, imagine what these guys could do if we actually got behind them. So, but it's just having those conversations, going in and being pretty humble about it. For mine, it's not about overselling, because no one likes it, particularly in Australia, right? I mean, that might work in America, but in Australia, I don't think that comes off too well. We're a little bit more humble than that.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Tom.
Yep.
I guess one of the other challenges for startups is finding the right co-founders.
Yep, absolutely.
In their business. So is there anything that you've learned from your experiences that you would sort of take or want to impart to others?
Oh yeah. Now this is ripe for conversation. So we originally did start with 3 founders. And the founder who's no longer in the business was a friend of mine, and together we found Tom. So we kind of collectively, it was myself and then him and then Tom came third. And there's an old adage that says you shouldn't do business with friends, and it's one that I thought I could conquer because I had built a family business, right? They also say don't do business with family for the same reason, but I'd naively thought that idea of separating work and relationship was an easy one, because I found it easy, but it wasn't. Didn't prove to be that way. With the third co-founder, he found that he found that the relationship should be the same. Hey, let's just have fun first. And I'm like, well, actually, no, we're trying to build a business. So that was sort of problem one. And then beyond that, it was just, sometimes people just aren't cut out for the grind that is startup life. He had this perception of, we'll just build it, and that's actually the biggest hurdle. And I remember when we first got our MVP out, he said, "Oh, this is awesome. We finally got there." And I was like, I just looked at Tom, and he looked back at me, and he's like, "We haven't even started. Why does he think that this is?" And it just, we quickly had to start having some conversations about the effort and where we felt he could contribute. And it was nearly the death of Cardley, because we'd made this tough decision that we needed to exit a third co-founder out of the business before we got too big and before it was really painful to do it. He was kind of the mindset that this thing was just a slam dunk. It's going to go great places, so I should be paid handsomely for it, even though it hasn't got there yet. So we nearly lost the will to continue because of 12 months it took us to exit him from the business. And that was a hugely disruptive and painful process where we're like, well, we should just stop working if it's not going to, why continue if someone effectively owns a third of this business and they're doing nothing, and we're going to just make them money, and we're just going to do ourselves out of, our rightful share. So it was a very, very difficult time and a really important lesson to learn. I love imparting whatever mistakes I've learnt from to others, and this is the big one, which is, be really absolutely clear on roles and responsibilities and what people are going to contribute to and what your expectations are about that up front. because despite the fact that you think you've had that conversation, sometimes you actually haven't had it enough. And if you are dealing with a personality where you actually literally need to write that down so that it's really clear, then do that before you've actually written something else down, which is like a founder's agreement that then becomes difficult to navigate your way around. So, ironically though, you know, I've got a he helped connect Tom and I. So, and Tom's just like awesome, you know, just an amazing developer, and has taken on board the challenge that we set for ourselves, which was to just create completely new technology. Let's find a new way to let people create content, and that was a huge task. I think in hindsight, it was way harder than he thought it was going to be, but he had the balls to just say, "Yep, I actually think I think I can do this," and cracked on and did it. So, yes, I mean, you know, even though it was a really painful road, heaps of good stuff's come out of it, and lots of good lessons.
I think it's also important to note that sometimes things change, and sometimes you don't know until you start working with someone as well. I think one of the things that I've learned is when I start seeing that and recognize that, to act on it a lot earlier than I have previously, because if you let things fester, they just get so much worse.
Yep.
So much worse.
Yeah, we let it go we'd kind of made this internal decision 3 months before we had the awkward conversation. 3 months was ages. We let that go on way too long, and I think it was we're both too nice. Tom's just, you know, he's just a fantastic guy and just really, really nice, and I am too. But I like to think that I'm, you know, got the right moral compass and stuff around that. Like, I don't want to upset people's feelings, and rather than have an awkward conversation, we just let it build to the point where we were just like starting to have conversations between each other without him knowing, and then that we were, you know, sort of knifing someone in the back behind their back, and that was not good.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very similar. Like, I'm super non-confrontational when
it
comes to these sort of things, and so the best bit of advice that I got from this was with my business partner Adir. We were having a bit of issues internally with a team member, and so I knew what I had to do.
Mm-hmm.
I just had to have that penny drop for me, and I think that conversation was around, you know, you're not willing to have that one conversation to potentially upset one person, but how many people are being affected by this, by the decision not to do that.
Yeah.
You know, and if you can't make difficult decisions, then potentially, you know, you should look at whether you want to run a business.
Yeah, absolutely. Because there's going to be lots of other really difficult decisions along the way. So you're right. I think it's, you've got to be prepared to make some tough calls. And if you're not, maybe it isn't for you.
Absolutely. And so finally, we mentioned it at the start, but you're a little bit sleep deprived at the moment.
Yeah.
You've just had a newborn.
Correct.
So congratulations.
Thank you very much.
I guess one of the other things that, you know, again, I personally don't feel that gets talked about enough is, you know, the toll that just having family, you know, the toll of us deciding to start a startup has on family, and also just a balance of different things. So how are you, I guess, balancing, you know, commitments to your partner as well as having a newborn and running a startup? Yeah.
I think we've spoken about this previously, but I have the luxury of, my wife and I have kind of only ever known each other whilst I've been working on Cardly. So, which means we kind of did things really quickly, right? So, we got engaged within like 8 months, and then married 8 months after that, and now we've got a baby. So, so it's all been pretty quick. But the advantage for me in that she's kind of not known it any different, so that's kind of a good thing. It's not great, right? Like, we're always trying to strike a better work-life balance, but she knows that I'm always thinking about, you know, work. It kind of never. She knows that it's never not sort of on my radar. So, I think that would be a lot harder if we had known each other for several years and I'd had like a corporate job, and which meant that, you know, my time out of hours was her time. I think that would have been a much bigger change to make. And, you know, my wife is a complete saint, right? Like, I was working on our honeymoon. I was working the day of our marriage. I think I was definitely working in the hospital when Harriet arrived. So yeah, she has kind of known that that's kind of who I am. And fortunately I found someone who loves my drive and is okay with it. Doesn't mean that it isn't an issue and isn't something that we have to always try and strike a balance with. But that is one of the things that I think, it would be really hard if it was the other way around, right? That you would all of a sudden trying to balance all of that and someone didn't know that going in. So, for us, it's maybe a little bit easier in that regard.
Yeah, it's, I find it would be exceptionally hard to have a partner in life who doesn't really, understand or is supportive of that. I've had a relationship previously that didn't quite work out, but like my girlfriend's kind of seen it all. She's gone through, when we started dating, it was like the tail end of stage label and running out of money and stuff like that. So I set the expectations very low to begin with on that front. So, but yeah, I think, again, I think it's a massively understated part of running startups or business in general.
Well, that's right. I mean, if you can't navigate your way through that, you're adding a whole bunch of new pressure, right? And I imagine that would have an impact on your mental well-being, and you're trying to appease everybody, your staff, your investors, your partner, and you're trying to make everyone happy. That's tough. Yeah.
Absolutely. So to end things off, part of the hustle for me is to help connect the people on the show with some of the listeners at home.
Yep.
So every guest gets to ask a question or an ask that they want to make. So what's the ask?
I haven't really given that any thought. Give me an example of what others have asked for.
Others have asked for, they've been looking for particular hires. They've just asked people to check out and help spread the word for their startup. Just anything that they're kind of struggling for, need help with, or just, are in need of in the next little while. All
right. Well, okay. If anyone out there knows a business, and you probably all do, that could do more to help sort of create customer loyalty and customer engagement, and thinks that, by them just typing collateral and making stuff just look really generic is bad, and they would like to do it in a really personalised way with handwriting, then they should, reach out and come and have a chat to us at Cardly.
I feel like everyone knows at least a business. I have to introduce you to a few of our clients as well.
Sounds good.
There's so many different users for Cardly. But Patrick, once again, thanks for coming on the show and for talking about a whole range of things.
Pleasure. No, thank you.
For anyone that wants to find out more, say hello, get in touch, what's the best way for them to do that?
Yeah, just head to cardly.net and they can use the links.
Perfect. I'll make sure that link is in the show notes. Once again, thanks for coming on.
Awesome. Thank you.